Hi, Corrinne. I realize this filming angle position thing is a little bit funky, but lighting was terrible, so here I am. I loved what you said last week about how people are people. I have some thoughts on that for today's video, but through a slightly reversed perspective. Also, today's video is slightly unique because for better or for worse, I already filmed it once and hated it. And this is take 2. Hopefully that means it will be better, but I guess you never know. I, for one, remain optimistic, which is ironic because today's video concerns pessimism. As I'm sure you've noticed, when one moves to college, or as in your case, moves to the other side of the planet, as one does, you start to think about how your perspective has changed over the past few years and even your whole life. Unsurprisingly, I was on a nostalgic trip to the thoughts of yesteryear Hallie when I realized that my perspective on the quality of life has drastically changed. Now, to start at the beginning of this particular thought journey, I will give a glimpse into my semi-delusional childhood brain. You see, when I was a very little kid, I honestly thought that everything was wonderful. You play with toys inside and dirt outside, bebop around the house with mommy, and life is simplistically nice. As I grew into a slightly older kid, I realized that some things in life are not wonderful. I discovered the great sorrows of necessary vegetables and naps. I became more conscious of the not niceness of punishments, and vaguely aware that in existence were really not nice things like bad guys and being sick. Even then though, all that existed in my small universe was easily categorized into wonderful or not wonderful. All was still simple, still black or white, still great or not great. Complexities and complications had yet to encroach on the clarity of my youthful perspective. However, as I grew even older and closer-ish to adulthood, I realized that nothing is wonderful. I realize in saying those words I sound like the most jaded, pessimistic, apathetic, and indifferent young adult you could possibly find. But I actually don't mean to sound pessimistic or say that everything is terrible, because it isn't. What I mean is that nothing that is real can be defined as only good or bad. If it can be defined as simply good or bad, it is the fictional creation of your mind or someone else's. Actual relationships, events, and people are too complex, messy, and internally diverse to ever fit into one of those categories. Nothing in your life will be just wonderful. Ever. So we know that we live in a broken world, so technically we should expect that things in life will be broken, that people will hurt us or dreams will fall apart. But I think we still like to define the individual aspects or periods of our lives as either causing struggle or causing joy. I think we still think of people as either good or bad. This probably sounds really obvious. Duh, Hallie, you thought life was great all the time. Newsflash, it's not. But I think that it's difficult to see our greatest sources of joy in this life as future sources of pain. But our favorite people will hurt us deep. Our most fulfilling relationships will be a burden. The places that we find purpose will disappoint us, to the point that we may never want to go back. Especially when people have had a lot of struggles in the past, ourselves included, we think they deserve a happy ending. And they do, but they won't get one. The light at the end of the tunnel is speckled with shadow, or maybe it's even really just more tunnel. This all sounds really harsh, but it's meant to be freeing. I'm a huge expectations person. If I'm dreading or looking forward to something, it drastically impacts how I feel about life in that moment. So I've had to learn to be very careful with my expectations. If I expect someone I love to be just wonderful, then I hurt us both when that expectation is inevitably disappointed. It's not fair to either of us. We have to enter life with expectations of not wonderful. That doesn't mean it won't ever be wonderful at all, but it does mean that when that speckled darkness shows up in the midst of a source of joy, we won't be surprised and we won't be disappointed. We will still feel hurt, but we will come from a perspective of realistic standards, and we can utilize grace in that moment toward that person or situation. The fact that nothing is wonderful is a reminder that we are temporary visitors on an alien planet, never meant to satisfy our need for wonderful. It pointed back to a God who promises a heaven where things really are wonderful. Again, I realize this may all be completely obvious to you, but because I struggle with expectations and with idealizing things that I think are wonderful, I often need a perspective shift on this issue. And even if it doesn't really change your perspective, I hope something I said today makes you think. Bye!